evil.
Resident Evil 3 is one of the most iconic PlayStation 1 survival horror games of all time. Getting to see the ever-famous Jill Valentine again as she escapes Raccoon City was a great story setup. To add to this, we were also given one of the horror genre's most iconic monsters in the Nemesis. And with that, you have yourself an incredibly iconic game. So 21 years after its release, Capcom decided to bring new fans of the series and veterans alike back to Jill Valentine's desperate escape from Raccoon City in the remake of Resident Evil 3. And well, this is going to be my most divisive game comparison yet. In this video, I'll be comparing both the original and remake versions of Resident Evil 3. I'll be looking into what each version does better than the other and looking to answer the question, which of these games is the best version of Resident Evil 3. So kick back, relax, and get settled in as I compare Resident Evil 3 Nemesis versus Resident Evil 3 Remake. Let's begin. Looking at RE3 Original 2 decades later, and there is a lot that sticks out. First of course is its camera and movement system. This game utilises the classic fixed camera angle style, which I personally am a big fan of. I feel like this camera style adds a lot to the game, from both a horror perspective and an artsy kind of perspective. Confining the player's view to a strict sightline does wonders for making you feel vulnerable and scared. Removing the player's own control over the camera really adds to the horror aspect of this game. Not only that, but it does also make it so the developers can put a focus on what they want the player to see at any given moment. The fixed camera angles used in the original Resident Evil games have such an artsy feel to them, and that is even more clear here with RE3. The devs at Capcom truly crafted a dangerous, chaotic location with this game's Raccoon City, and unlike in RE2 Original, we get to see a whole lot more of it. Exploring Raccoon City's dark backstreets, alleyways and destroyed areas is such a treat here, and that's in part due to the fixed camera angles. This fixed camera angle style can even in some ways help the game's atmosphere. When in large open spaces, the camera angle reflects this and shows the large open area that you were able to explore. Or if you're exploring its tight narrow corridors or alleyways, the camera takes a closer, more claustrophobic angle, giving the player that type of atmosphere without even realising it. Speaking on Raccoon City in Resident Evil 3 and comparing it to the remake, this is where we see our first major comparison and flaw between the two versions. For one, in general, the remake's version of Raccoon City feels so simple and linear. It's way less expansive compared to the original, and almost feels like a diet version of the locale. During a playthrough of the remake, it feels like you're just being rushed through the city to get to your next objective and progress along the story, almost as if the game is an on-rails rendition of the original. Whereas in that original game, it feels like I can take more time with exploring the environments, looking for supplies and items, along with seeing firsthand just how much chaos the T-Virus has inflicted upon this city. Now, of course the remake, as you would expect, is miles better fidelity and graphics wise, but with 21 years in technological differences, I would hope that's the case. But even still, the original game's environments clean up really nice. The game's art direction is something I also want to mention, because man, in my opinion, this is the best we would see from the original trilogy. The neon lights that decorate all the buildings contrast beautifully with the destroyed and flame-engulfed environments. It has this beautiful urban and apocalyptic mix that I really appreciate, and it's also pretty well reflected in the remake also. Great art direction and graphics is one thing, but how do the game's sound design and soundtrack stack up against each other? Well, it's another case of newer doesn't always equal better. For example, the original RE3 is home to some of the series' most iconic songs, such as Free From Fear or even the Nemesis theme. The music is so iconic here, whereas in the remake, they just don't hit the same. Sure, there is some great tracks here, all done with full Hollywood-esque production value, but that doesn't equal better. And in terms of sound design, both games are good. RE3 Remake is far more realistic and immersive, whereas RE3 Original is more retro and has that kind of PlayStation 1 sound to it. Enough about visuals and audio now. In terms of how we play and experience Resident Evil 3, we see two very different control styles in both versions. The original game features tank controls, which is a you love them or hate them sort of deal, and I personally love them. There is just something so classic and restrictive about the original tank control style and movement, and it's even been expanded upon in this game, with Jill now being able to dodge enemy attacks if you time it right. And like I said, I do personally love this control scheme, but I do know that some people just can't stand it at all, and for that, the remake uses a more conventional, modern control scheme, along with a third person over-the-shoulder perspective, While I do feel some elements of the game's horror and art direction are lost with the change in camera style, I do feel like in its gameplay, you still get that same oh shit moment as an enemy moves towards you. So for example, in the original game, you really didn't have to aim your weapon while firing. However, in the remake, precision is key. To put zombies down, you almost exclusively have to hit them in the head. And trying to hit a not so huge target while it's actively moving towards you is no easy feat. So in fairness, while I do yes prefer tank controls, and yes they do add a sense of horror and dread to the moment to moment gameplay, I will say that this modern controls game also has its moments just like that. However, it's just in a different way. To go along with this controls game, the overall gameplay loop is rather different in RE3 compared to RE2 Remake. In the original game, enemies come in far larger quantities. Raccoon City overall feels way more overrun, and it makes it so players have to really choose when to fight and when to run, as you definitely won't have enough bullets to take everyone out. Whereas in the remake, enemies feel much more spread out and manageable. The game's limited inventory system, which is a Resident Evil staple, I also feel was done far better in the original game compared to the remake. In the original, I feel like there was simply more items, more weapons, and more puzzles, so I was always fighting for space in my inventory, which led to me having to make very important decisions constantly. Whereas in the remake, its inventory feels simpler. It feels like there's a lot less choices, and therefore it's much easier and less of a choice of what to bring. And that balance and dance of what to take with you before you leave a safe room is such a key part of a Resident Evil game. And it not really being a hard choice or that strong in RE3 Remake is another knock against this game. Another key comparison to make between the pair is the amount of cut enemies that just didn't make it into the remake. Even just from my few hours replaying the original for this video, oh that enemy isn't in the remake, or oh I didn't remember that being in RE3. I did also briefly mention earlier how RE3 original had more puzzles, and that's true. It felt like there was a nice variety of different puzzles with unique solutions and items, whereas in RE2 Remake, everything again just feels so linear and simple. It's honestly really textbook stuff, and I know it sounds very negative, but it's true. A big part of any Resident Evil game is the game giving you these stop and think moments when you get stuck at a difficult puzzle, and I like and want those moments, but RE2 Remake didn't really have any. The next elephant in the room that needs to be discussed is the Nemesis, one of the main features of the game. And well, he's very interesting to say the least. In the original RE3, Nemesis is this ruthless pursuer. It feels like when he shows up, he is constantly on top of you. He is always nearby, and while he is a hard foe to take down, if players manage to do so, they'll be rewarded handsomely with parts to build more powerful weapons for you to use. This then presents the player with a choice. They could either use their ammo up on fighting Nemesis in hopes that he will drop the more powerful gear, or they can conserve their ammo and use it elsewhere and just avoid him, which not only makes everyone's playthroughs different and more interesting, but allows players for more control over their playthrough. Now compare that ruthless pursuer version of Nemesis to the one seen in the remake, and it's a laughable comparison to say the least. Nemesis in the remake is honestly one of the biggest letdowns in recent memory with this franchise. Sure, he has his kill moments where he appears, but that's exactly it. He has just moments. He doesn't feel like this ruthless pursuer, always on your ass. Instead, it feels like a scripted scene. This, I guess, stems from Raccoon City overall being smaller and more linear compared to the original. But even then, it's not just the issue of him not showing up enough. He's also just not that strong or imposing. It takes exactly one hand grenade on standard difficulty to drop Nemesis to the ground. Keep in mind, you can find multiple of these within the opening hour of the game, which results in Nemesis just being not as much as a threat. And that's a shame. Sure, you have your multiple harder difficulties, but if you need to artificially increase difficulty like this, just for your big scary enemy to be, well, big and scary, then you failed. Going into the remake, especially compared to the original, one thing is obvious. The game's story and performances are very different. Gone is the cheesy voice acting and awkward animations of the original, and in comes Hollywood-esque fully motion capture performances. But while that sounds like a great thing, and don't get me wrong, it is, with RE3 Remake, I'm personally not too sure on the direction they took with Jill's character. In the original, Jill is very witty, smart, badass, but she's also very cool, calm and collected. But with the remake Jill, she has this kind of fiery, hotshot sort of personality, with one-liners, quips and curses to boot, and I'm personally just not a fan. It seems like Jill, at times, is like a Diet Leon in some instances, with the sheer amount of one-liners she drops. But I will say, despite me not being a fan of her character, I will say her actual performance by Nicole Tompkins is amazing. But her character in the remake just feels like such a sharp departure from her character in the original, and even in other RE games. It's sad to say, but this doesn't feel quite like the Jill Valentine I played as in RE1 Remake or even RE5. The rest of the characters in this game and their performances are pretty good. Carlos for one is still really cool, and he maintains his heroic sensibilities, which I like, and the other characters all seem alright as well. Continuing on with the remake, and another strange omission from this game is the branching choices from the original. In the original game, occasionally a set of choices would be presented to the player. These could be in encounters with Nemesis. You would be presented with the choice to hide from him or flee, or even fight him head on. And these choices really spiced up the gameplay along with every subsequent playthrough. For example, there's a part of the game where Nemesis tracks down Jill and Carlos, and I had two very different choices to make here. I chose to hide from Nemesis instead of fleeing, and luckily for me, a nearby room exploded, knocking Nemi down and netting me one of the parts for the buildable pistol. Little stuff like this makes the original Resident Evil 3 what it is, and there isn't anything like this in the slightest in the remake. And well, this brings me to my biggest flaw of all with the remake compared to the original: the overall sheer amount of cut content. It can't be understated how much of the game's experience is just not present in the remake. From key locations such as the clock tower to Raccoon City overall just being way smaller. RE3 Remake at best is a speedrun version of the original, which makes this game sort of feel unfinished due to just the amount of cut content that's well cut. Its overall replay value is also massively hindered because of this. Not only does the choice-based system I mentioned earlier play a part in having subsequent playthroughs feel fresh, but also just down to the fact that the original game is much larger. The only real reason to replay RE3 Remake is for completionist reasons, or to simply play it on a harder difficulty. Whereas RE3 Original had you experiencing the game all over again in a different way with its multiple choices. And replay value is a huge draw with Resident Evil games. I don't even think that there is a single Resident Evil game that I have only played a single time. I always love playing through these games multiple times, and that's of course just part of their unique charm, and the OG RE3 takes this point compared to the remake. I actually initially did play RE3 Remake first, and I didn't believe what exactly people disliked about it so much. Sure, it felt a little bit short, but once I played the original, my eyes were opened. Seriously, if you chose to play the original after the remake, you're gonna see just how much of this game didn't make it into the remake. And it's a real shame that that's the case, because in some ways, the remake showed potential to expand the story and lore of RE3 beyond the original. The best example of this comes during the game's opening. In it, we spend some time in Jill's apartment, and this is one of the most memorable sections from the entire remake. Not only is it moody and atmospheric, but it also shows us a glimpse into the life Jill was living after the events of the first game. How stricken with paranoia and PTSD she was. The environmental storytelling in her apartment is great, and I really liked how they touched upon this part of Jill's character that isn't really talked about in the original game. However, it's pretty much dropped as soon as you exit her apartment. And unfortunately, this sentiment is kind of true throughout the entirety of Resident Evil 3 Remake. The game overall feels like an underbaked shell of its former self, and that's really upsetting. The potential this game had was sky high, and Capcom really dropped the ball with this game in my opinion. In general, if you like modern Resident Evil games, you're gonna like this one, but if you are looking for something true to the original game, like how RE1 Remake is to its original, you're not gonna find that here. So I have to say that the original RE3 is miles better than RE3 Remake, but that's how I recommend you experience RE3. The game's story, Jill, and Nemesis are all done best in the original version, especially its rendition of Raccoon City, which in and of itself is an important character. RE3 Remake is just okay. I think it's a fine Resident Evil game, but a pretty lackluster remake. And that sentiment is shared between many Resident Evil fans, and that's where my thoughts end for not only this comparison, but this video. I want to thank you so very much for watching this entire video. I hope you found my comparison between these two titles to be insightful and helpful. What version of RE3 do you personally prefer? Please let me know down below and why. And hey, while you're already down there, what other games would you like to see me compare just like this? And with that final note, I'm done here for today. I want to thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you in my next one. Peace.